That song was probably just the right choice for this occasion, as you will see. Everybody knows that they are going to die, but nobody believes it. A little story of faith there. Our theme this week is serving Jesus. And last night we talked about serving Jesus surrendered. And this morning we talked about serving Jesus in the last generation. And now I want to talk about serving Jesus to the end. Whether the word end means the second coming of Jesus or the moment when we die. Everybody knows that they're going to die, but nobody really believes it. Maury Schwartz was dying. Dr. Schwartz was professor of social psychology at Brandeis University in Boston, Massachusetts. He was diagnosed with ALS. The technical term for that is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's better known as Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS is a brutal and rapid degeneration of the nervous system. Piece by piece, your body loses its ability to function, yet you feel excruciating pain in those very body parts that don't work anymore. Soon after the diagnosis, Maury was barely strong enough to brake his car as it rolled out of the driveway. That was the end of his driving. Soon after that, he began tripping as he walked, and he had to buy a cane. And that was the end of walking free. Then one day, he discovered he could no longer dress himself. And that was the end of his privacy. The diagnosis left Maury with a choice. He could have given himself up to self-pity. He could have become bitter and withdrawn. He could have spent his final hours in anger and sadness. But Maury had a different idea. He saw dying as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. One last scholarly project. One last chance to learn something that could change the world. Dying filled Maury's life with a new sense of purpose. The great theme at Loma Linda University is wholeness. It's grounded in the core Adventist belief that human beings are whole persons, that body, mind, spirit, heart, all of these come together to make a complete person. And one of the most moving moments at Loma Linda was when I was talking to the president one day. At the time, her name was Lynn Behrens. And she said to me that this concept of wholeness has meant more and more to me as life goes on. She says, I have now become convinced that it is possible to die whole. Everybody knows that they are going to die, but nobody believes it. If they did, they would do things differently. Those are the words of Maury Schwartz. The reality of death leaves us with a choice. We can act as if death doesn't apply to us personally. Whereas a comedian once said, we know that everybody's going to die, but we become convinced that an exception will somehow be made in our case. We can believe that somehow we'll be the exception. Or we can learn to live with death in mind. We can live each day as if it were our last. We can, in fact, do things differently. Maury Schwartz's project caught the attention of the Boston Globe, a major East Coast newspaper. The articles were noticed by Ted Koppel, who at the time was host of the well-known TV show Nightline. Koppel and his interview crew soon showed up at the door of Maury's Boston house. Maury's favorite student was a man named Mitch Albom. I first became acquainted with Mitch as a sportscaster. He would be seen giving reports on various games and performances and writing for the newspapers about sports events. And Albom one day was flipping channels on his television when he heard the voice of Ted Koppel. And Koppel said, "Who is Maury Schwartz? And why should we care?" Maury Schwartz had been Albom's favorite teacher in journalism school. Albom had promised to stay in touch with his professor after graduation, but life had gotten in the way. Albom became a famous sports writer for the Detroit Free Press and various TV networks. He was too busy to connect with old professors. 16 years went by without any contact. Mitch drove fast, exercised hard, and made more money than he ever dreamed anyone could have. He was at the other end of life's journey. He had no time to think and reflect. His days were full, and yet he was strangely unsatisfied. Then his newspaper went on strike. For the first time in his life, Albom was without a job, without a paycheck, and at war with his employers. And the strike was expected to last for months. After a week of intense boredom and encroaching poverty, Mitch picked up the phone and called his old professor in Boston. Maury responded, "You're coming to visit me?" "Well, could I?" "How about Tuesday?" When Mitch Albom was a student at Brandeis, he and Maury had always gotten together on Tuesday. "We're Tuesday people," Maury used to joke. So every Tuesday for 14 weeks, Mitch got on a plane and flew from Detroit to Boston, spent a couple of hours with his old professor, and then flew back home. In less than 15 weeks, Maury would be dead. Mitch spent those Tuesdays drinking in wisdom from the other end of life. These Tuesdays would change Mitch Albom forever. If you're at all familiar with his writing, you realize his books for the last 10 years have been very different than sports. They've been about faith, spirituality, heaven, and the crucial issues of life. You see, Mitch Albom got to take Maury's final class. The topic was the meaning of life. No textbooks were required. The class was taught from experience. A funeral was held instead of a graduation. There was only one student, Mitch. There was no final exam, but a book-length paper was required. That paper was published under the title, Tuesdays with Maury. An old man, a young man, and life's greatest lesson. Many topics were covered in Maury's final class. I've chosen to highlight 4 of these this morning. 4 of the life lessons that Maury taught Mitch over those 14 weeks. Lesson number 1, don't live in fear of embarrassment. As ALS shuts the body down, one segment at a time, One becomes increasingly dependent on other people. You need help eating. You need help sitting. You need help moving from place to place. And it only gets worse. Ted Koppel asked Maury what he feared more than anything else. What do you think he said? He said, "Well, Ted, someday soon, someone's going to have to wipe my backside." Why would Maury have such a fear? Because that would be the ultimate sign of dependency. You feel helpless and useless. But when the time came, Maury learned to enjoy it. He said it was like getting to be a baby one more time. Like most men, Maury had always done his best to avoid crying in public. Real men don't cry, or so many people believe. Crying to a man feels like weakness. It's embarrassing. Crying made Maury feel ashamed. But as he approached the end of life, he came to realize that feelings are a huge part of being alive. Those who don't allow feelings live life at a very diminished level. Let me tell you something. If you see a grown man crying, he's not a sissy. He's alive. He can feel. He knows what life is like. If he hadn't been for that singing group standing in front of me, you would have seen my tears during that song and knowing what I was about to preach. If you see a man crying, he's not a sissy. He's alive. Tears are okay. Those who allow themselves to shed tears laugh more deeply, taste more deeply, live more deeply. Maury was dying anyway. What did it matter what other people think? Tears are okay, Maury always said to Mitch. One of these days I'll make you cry. You'll see. Fear of embarrassment keeps us from doing things we know we should do. Doing things we would otherwise choose to do. Fear of embarrassment makes us unwilling to take healthy risks. It makes us unwilling to learn and to grow. And the approach of death helped Maury to lay that fear aside. Lesson number 1, don't live in fear of embarrassment. Lesson number 2, every day is a gift. The first thing you learn from a terminal illness is just how precious every day really is. To use Maury's words, if you can learn how to die, you'll also learn how to live. You see, dying is only one thing to be sad about. The far greater tragedy is to live an unhappy and unfulfilled life. And we learn to be unhappy from Western culture. Western culture teaches us to be unhappy. According to Western culture, happiness is whatever the ad campaigns say it is. Happiness is having the perfect figure. How's that working for you? Happiness is drinking more Coke. Actually, all that will do is help your dentist drive a better car. Happiness is buying the right athletic shoes. Happiness is knowing the latest dirt about Brad and Angelina. But have you ever wondered why so many supermodels and actors are so unhappy? Why they spend so much time in rehab or in jail? Does the name Paris Hilton mean anything to you? How about Lindsay Lohan? If money and fame could buy happiness, NBA players and Hollywood actors would be the happiest people on earth. They aren't. The problem is that things and achievements can never truly satisfy. Instead, they leave one feeling a desperate need for more and more. No one ever has enough. You think the next house, the next car, the next job, the next girlfriend, the next boyfriend will truly make you happy. But when those dreams turn out empty, you keep on striving for more and more. Listen to Maury's own words. The culture we live in isn't working. But if the culture isn't working, don't buy it. Choose your own culture. Create your own culture. Don't be governed by the crowd. He could be a Seventh-day Adventist right now. Don't buy the culture. Create your own culture. In many ways, Western culture is not our friend. It's a bad culture that tells women they aren't thin enough. It's a bad culture that tells men they aren't rich enough or important enough. It's a bad culture that teaches us to live for ourselves. Mitch had, in fact, been feeling guilty about his houses and his cars and his lavish lifestyle. But he justified it, comparing himself with the rich actors and athletes he hung out with. He felt he needed to keep in step with them if he was going to interview them and be part of their life. But Maury completely shattered that illusion. Mitch, he said, if you're trying to show off for the people at the top, forget it. They will look down on you anyway. And if you're trying to show off for the people at the bottom, forget it. They will only envy you and hate you. Status will get you nowhere. Only an open heart will allow you to be a friend of everyone. If you knew that today was your last day, what would you do differently? Who would you call? What would you do? What would be different? 20 years ago, I knew it was my last day on earth. I was drowning in the Pacific Ocean. It's a long story, but my wife helped to rescue me after I thought all hope was gone. When I hit that beach alive, I was the happiest man on earth. I knew that God still had a purpose for my life. I knew that from then on, each day would be a gift. I learned to stop and smell the flowers instead of just rushing off to the next appointment. I learned to take time to affirm my students and my children and to date my wife. And we still do. Looking forward to Monday, by the way. I learned to play golf now and then. That can be frustrating, but it's good. I learned to be more fully in the present. I learned how to forgive. By looking death straight in the eye, I finally learned how to live. That's why Maury's story appealed to me so much. Because in a different way, I had been there and done that. And I too have learned that every day is truly a gift. Lesson number 2, every day is a gift. Lesson number 3, take time to love. and to be loved. Take time for relationships. Maury told Mitch, the thing I'm learning most from this disease, the most important thing in life, is to learn how to give out love and let love come in. Many people feel as if love were a finite quantity. The more we give away, the less we will have. But the opposite is true. Listen to Maury's wisdom from the other end of life. The way that you get meaning into your life is to devote yourself to loving others. Devote yourself to the community around you. The more you give love away, the more you experience it yourself. But we not only need to give love, and this may be harder, we need to let love come in. Many people are reasonably loving toward others, but are very uncomfortable when people love back. It seems to me that women often feel they don't deserve love. No one could possibly love me. I'm so ugly. I'm so unlovable. Men, on the other hand, are often afraid if they let someone love them, truly love them, it'll make them soft. It'll ruin their masculinity. I am a rock. I am an island. I touch no one and no one touches me. Thanks for those words, Simon and Garfunkel. So both men and women go around sabotaging the attempts of others to love them. To open your heart to love is a really big risk. But it's the only way to truly live. As Maury often said, love each other or perish. When we live without love, we're like a bird with broken wings. I think Maury had an awesome idea. While he was still able to move about, he went to the funeral of a colleague who died suddenly. When the funeral was finished, Maury was angry. That was a total waste of time, he said. People said all those nice things about him, and he didn't get to hear any of it. That gave birth to an idea. Maury decided to stage a funeral while he was still alive to enjoy it. He printed invitations. He sent them out to all his family and friends. A great crowd gathered at his home. Everyone shared the things they loved about him, and he responded with what each person had meant to him. Everyone went away profoundly moved by the experience. And Maury felt a glow that stayed with him all the way to the end. One of the things I've learned in getting older is the importance of long-term relationships. Now that our parents have died, my brother is about the only person left in the world who has known me from the beginning of my life all the way to now. We didn't particularly like each other when we were small, but we're drawn more and more to each other as life goes on. At birth and at death, we need other people in order to survive. Independence is an illusion that we can allow ourselves only in the middle part of life. Yet even now, we need others just as much, only in different ways. Lesson number 3, take time to love and to be loved. Lesson number 4, forgive others. Forgive yourself. In spite of his debilitating illness, Maury felt extremely fortunate. Knowing roughly when he would die, he had the opportunity to process his whole life, make amends where necessary, clear up misunderstandings, set things straight. The road to peace, the road to dying whole, is forgiveness, both forgiving others and forgiving yourself. Maury counseled, "Forgive everyone who has hurt you." Yes, everyone. This is the secret to complete freedom in life. Forgiveness breaks the bonds of negative thinking. To forgive someone else is sometimes a blessing to them, but it's always a blessing to us. Resentment, hatred, and anger may do little damage to one another, but they always do heavy damage to us. If you have one day left to live, why live it in bitterness and resentment? But you also need to forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for everything you failed to do in this life. Forgive yourself for judging and condemning those who have hurt you or those you love. Beating yourself up over what you cannot change doesn't do anyone any good. Forgiveness is very costly, but not nearly as costly as resentment. Remember that. Mental revenge hurts only you and me. It doesn't hurt anybody else. To forgive is to break the chains of the past. To forgive is to find healing for ourselves. As Maury used to say, everybody knows they're going to die, but nobody believes it. If they did, they would do things differently. Before I close, I want to apply the unique Seventh-day Adventist perspective to Maury's lessons for life. The book Tuesdays with Maury is a life-changing experience to read. I highly recommend it. But there's one thing missing. While Maury seems to have been a believer, there's very little reference to God or to faith in the book. Maury's experience was profoundly meaningful, but not everybody gets to die the way that Maury did. Maury got to know the time of his death so he could be ready. Maury died surrounded by his family and friends. This mitigated the pain and the embarrassment of ALS. But for many, death comes suddenly. There is no time to prepare, no time to make things right, no time to forgive and be forgiven, no time to smell the flowers before you go. For others, death is the loneliest time of all. They end up in a nursing home, locked away from family and friends. Maury rightly rejected money and fame as sources of meaning and purpose in life. Maury rightly rejected sex as a substitute for genuine bonding and tenderness and deep relationship. For him, the ultimate experience of life is long-term, warm, caring relationships with other human beings. But even the best of such relationships are fragile. People move. They change their minds about you. They may divorce you. And yes, they may die and leave you all alone. Here's where the Seventh-day Adventist perspective makes all the difference. It points us to the ultimate relationship, the relationship with God through Jesus Christ. He is the ultimate friend. He has 4 qualities that no other friend can have. Number 1, he knows all about you. That means there are no secrets that can scuttle the relationship. Number 2, although he knows all about you, he loves you just the way you are. No need to hide anything. No need to be afraid to confess the truth about ourselves. He already knows, and he loves us just the way we are. And number 3, he is genuinely valuable. He made the universe. My friends are as messed up as I am. So if I want to have a friend who's really valuable, Jesus is the one. And finally, number 4, best of all, he will never die, which means he will never ever leave you. Even in death, even in the stillness and silence of death, the Bible says the spirit returns to God who gave it. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but an analogy that I find helpful is that's like the software. You know, computer has hardware and software. Our bodies are like the hardware. The software is what that unique something that makes us who we are. When we die, we're no longer conscious. We don't know the passing of time. But the software goes back to God. He stores it in the eternal cloud. And one day, he can restore us just the way we would love to be. You see, Jesus truly never leaves us or forsakes us, even in death. There is a friend who's truly valuable, who knows all about us, and yet loves us just the way we are. That is why relationship with Jesus has been central to millions of people over the last 2,000 years. A relationship with Jesus provides stability and a purpose that no other relationship can. It provides forgiveness and the motivation to forgive. Rightly understood, it provides a security even death cannot shake. The sooner we discover the difference Jesus makes, the sooner we can begin to live, to really live. I cannot conclude this message without one last piece of the Seventh-day Adventist perspective. Because according to the Scriptures, death itself is a defeated foe. While we still face it in a powerful way, death has lost its ultimate sting. The Bible speaks of death as a sleep. And at the other end of that sleep is an eternity with your best friend. That meant so much to me when my mother died. I remember kissing her cheek 2 minutes later. It was so cold. But then I realized something. The dead know not anything. The dead are not conscious of the passage of time. That meant, at that moment when I kissed her cheek, she was already with Jesus in her experience, in her mind. The next thing that happens after death is the face of Jesus. And you know what's beautiful about the Adventist view of death? That we don't just go to heaven when we die, that we sleep for however long it takes. Is that not only is the first thing she sees the face of Jesus, the second thing she sees will be her husband and her sons and her family and her church and all of her friends. Because the beauty of the resurrection is that after death, the community is restored. We don't go one by one up to heaven in some ethereal existence, but we're united together in the resurrection. The community is restored. Everything that made life meaningful is restored at that time. For those who live by faith, death is not really an end. It's just an interruption of a life that is eternal. It doesn't loom over our lives with the finality that it may have for Maury. And if death is an interruption rather than an end, then eternity really begins now. And as the New Testament says, we have a down payment. We can begin to taste the life of heaven now. You don't have to wait until you're dying to learn how to live. Shall we pray? Lord, the essence of what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist is to live in the light of the end, to live in the light of the second coming, to live life with the perspective that only the end can bring. And we are grateful for a Jewish man who caught a glimpse of what that means, to begin to look at our lives from the perspective of the end. And when we come to that end, we won't be wishing we had watched more TV or played more video games. We may be wishing that we had lived each day to the full, that we had blessed others and been loved ourselves. Lord, I pray that no one in this auditorium spend one more day idling. Let us rather realize that each day is a gift, each day is a blessing, each day we can serve you and each other. Each day can be the first day of eternity. May that experience be ours, not because we deserve it, but because we freely receive it in Jesus Christ. And we thank you in his name. Amen.